everybody, and welcome back to the General Eclectic podcast with Rod Dreher. I'm your host, Kale Zeldin, and we are back for episode 21. Rod, we're legal now. We've hit 21 episodes, or this is the 21st episode, so pretty exciting. How are things back in Budapest?
Well, I look like I'm coming to you from the inside of a padded room. I'm actually in the little patio area of my apartment, the only place where we can get a stable Wi-Fi connection. So
one of the you've been singing the praises of Budapest the past month or so, but I think Wi-Fi infrastructure is not one of those praises.
Well, I think it's just the apartment, not the city. But since we last talked, I was in Warsaw at a really interesting conference where a bunch of Catholics, conservative Catholics, are starting a new university, mostly to train lawyers in advanced graduate studies. But they're trying to respond, they say, to the crisis in academia in the West by not by trying to reform what's already there, but by trying to start something new that will be classical in the sense that it'll be a traditional European university, and as well as being Catholic. But they invited me and some other people, also other non-Catholics there, to participate, people who are sympathetic with their proposal. And it was really encouraging, I have to tell you. And this continues on a theme that I've picked up in the 6 or 7 weeks I've been over here in this part of the world, that the future of the West, as far as people like you and me are concerned, and our many of our listeners, people who are traditional and more conservative, and even people who are liberal, but more in a more traditional sense of wanting to see universities be what universities were, not these sort of woke seminaries. The future seems to be coming out of this part of the world. I mean, it's premature to say that, but I'm just seeing things here in Hungary and now in Poland that do give me hope. And it'll be really interesting, Kale, if we see a reverse exodus of conservative or traditional scholars leaving America and Western Europe for institutions over here in Central Europe. And I've written on my blog about this local college called Matthias Corvinus Collegium. It's a conservative college. It's associated, all colleges here are funded by the government, but they're trying their very best to bring over American and Western European public intellectuals and professors just to talk to them, just to talk, period. And I think I might have mentioned here before, a well-known left-wing atheist, anti-woke professor wrote to me and said he'd got an invitation from Corvinus, and is it something he should take? I said, absolutely. You can have freer discussions here than you can in your own university. Whoever would have thought that this would have been the case in the former communist countries?
Yeah, I mean, that's just, fly back to talk to your 20-year-old self and have this conversation. And your 20-year-old self would have said what to you, Rod?
Yeah, I would have said, man, you're on drugs.
You're on drugs. Yeah, that's right.
You're on drugs. Crazy. Yeah, but this is where we are. And, it's a complicated thing because, as we've talked about here on our podcast, it's these people peoples of this region are in really bad shape. A lot of them, they were exploited by Russia. They don't want Russia in their lives, but they look west and they see how decadent we are and how they don't see much of a future there either. So they're having to try to figure this out on the fly because there's no obvious answer for what to do.
Yeah, we've spent a decent amount of time. Maybe it's our dead horse, I'm not sure, but we've spent a decent amount of time in the last month plus, talking about institutional capture, and especially in higher education. And we have focused almost exclusively on the humanities, philosophy and history and sociology and psychology and all of those things, and even those border disciplines, those sort of the social sciences, and the capture is pretty obvious, and we have talked about it a good bit, and I think we'll continue to talk about it because you and I are both subscribe to the idea, the old idea of ideas have consequences. But what I kind of want to talk to you about a little bit today in terms of institutional capture, and which both affects is both from an academic standpoint, but also from a governmental standpoint, is the capture of the sciences and the narratives that are coming out of the sciences. In particular, the New York Times has finally made it. I jokingly call this. It has become New York Times official that we can speak about in polite society the lab leak hypothesis, and we tipped our hats to this last week. We were talking about it's finally okay to talk about these things, but. So Bret Stephens comes out with an article. I think it was this morning. It was yesterday, talking about the lab leak hypothesis, not a theory, but a hypothesis, and how, despite nothing, no evidence, no new evidence has emerged, but rather it is now okay. And both of us are fans and followers of Brett Weinstein and his Dark Horse podcast, along with his wife Heather Hying, and they even, I think, did an early shout out to you and Live Not by Lies on one of their episodes right when your book came out. But they've been talking about this lab leak hypothesis going back deep into 2020, as far back as February of 2020. And it was immediately considered to be no different, right, than if you were an anti-vaxxer or you were some kind of sort of publicly unclean being for suggesting such a thing.
And they brought racism into it as well.
Remember that? Yeah. No, of course, because not only, were you a sort of a science denier, and even these labels are just so powerful, they're so load bearing. Not only were you considered a science denier, but it was, as they quipped on their show the other day, it was kind of a twofer. You could be a science denier and a racist at the same time. So how could you, in clean conscience, believe that there's any there? And then especially because Orange Man himself suggested that this was a possibility.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you see a form of narrative collapse. Mm-hmm. We're talking here about something that, it's not going to cure COVID if we recognize that this came from a lab, but what it will do is it will two things. I think that if it's confirmed, and I don't know that we'll ever be able to fully confirm it, but if it's confirmed, or if we come to believe that it's likely true, then we will hold China responsible for one of the worst catastrophes in modern human history, a global catastrophe. I don't know what it means to hold China responsible, but there should be some price to be paid here. And secondly, this is something that would affect all of us. It would mean that we would need to stop doing, or at least greatly restrict, this sort of, what do they call it, gain to function?
It's called gain of function research, which basically, in what you take a virus of some sort, in this case, in theory, a coronavirus, and you basically trigger evolutions in a lab to see what it will do, which in essence, it makes it more virulent. It makes it more potent. It makes it more resistant to things. And the idea here, again, in theory, the idea is to see what it'll do so that you can properly combat a pandemic.
This week,
full stop. Oh wait, and so the forces that have argued against such a thing is that it was playing with fire, And it had been during the Obama administration, it had been downgraded. It had been, they had said that they were not going to support it, and they were kind of suppressed it. And then some people during the Trump administration argued that it was worthy doing so. It was resumed under the Trump administration, not by the Trump administration, but under the Trump administration. And interestingly enough, apparently a huge someone who has his paws all over the kickstarting, the getting it this research going again is none other than Dr. Fauci, allegedly. Interesting.
I got an email from one of my readers who's a scientist himself and is very skeptical about all of this. I mean, he's been a lab leaker from the word go.
Yeah.
And he sent me a TED talk by a geneticist, came out like 5 or 6 years ago, talking about CRISPR and how CRISPR, the gene editing tool, can change entire species. And the geneticist talked about how you insert this in there, and then under certain conditions, it can completely rewrite the code for an entire species.
Right.
Well, my reader said that all it would take with the vaccine, the mRNA vaccines against COVID, all it would take is one malicious scientist deciding to play God to insert this into the vaccines. Now, look, he was not saying this did happen, but what he was trying to point out to me is this is how easily it could happen. We are playing with tools that are absolutely fundamental to human life, and we're reckless.
Yeah.
Chinese certainly are.
Yeah, this is where, I start sort of flirting upon the fringes of two things, sort of like what I am capable of knowing, and where my mind is going in certain possibilities. And so, I want to offer any of these sort of reflections with a huge asterisk. But there's so many questions that immediately pop to my mind about this. And so for instance, with the vaccines, it appears that they are remarkably stable is not quite the right word, but safe in the short term. I mean, that seems to be pretty clear. There are certainly cases where, there have been some adverse reactions that I've read about here and there. But for the most part, in terms of the rollout and the sheer numbers, we know that this thing is in the short term pretty safe. And yet we have zero mid and long term data to assess what we're all injecting into ourselves. And, I got to tell you that this is something that worries me. I do my best to be, sort of epistemically humble, and, recognize, knowing what I know and knowing what I don't know and respecting the things that I don't know, to riff on the old, what was that guy's name? The
Rumsfeld.
The Rumsfeldian quote is one of my favorite quotes of all time, not because it's Rumsfeld, but I think it really captures something that I think all of us should be sort of keep as our frame of reference. And the deep irony, of course, is that he was the one who said this about epistemic humility, and then he was one of the main forces of leading us into the disaster of the Iraq War under false pretenses. But at any rate, this idea, we need to respect what we don't know, and we don't seem to be able right now to plant ourselves in a place of humility about not knowing what we don't know. And for me personally, we're on sort of two different sides of this issue. You yourself have gotten vaccinated. Europe, hopping around Europe right now, and you've got proof. I'm sure you carry around some sort of proof that you have had the vaccine. This kind of stuff, I got to tell you, and maybe I'm just the paranoid guy of the podcast, but this kind of stuff makes me frankly pretty damn nervous.
Yeah, look, I don't fault you for being nervous. I mean, the reason Probably the main reason I got the vaccine was because I'm immunocompromised because of my struggle with Epstein-Barr virus. And I'm especially vulnerable to, and I'm 54 years old. So I had a greater risk than you do because you're a child. You're basically a teenager.
I'm a pup, rather.
But, the lab leak thing is so interesting to me as a phenomenon of the media. And I'm not just talking about.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not just talking about, the media, they didn't want to pay attention to it, all of which is true, but for the reasons you said earlier. But what's more interesting about this to me is that how can we know what's really happening, period? So many things in our life today are a crisis of authority. We don't know who we can trust.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
And I
don't want to insert real quick. Not only is it a crisis of authority, and not only was there cover, but there was an active suppression of it as a viable hypothesis. That's the part that is so chilling to me. And like, why? Why was there such an active? I mean, Facebook banned it. You couldn't talk about it on Facebook. You couldn't talk. Videos have been taken down from YouTube, which have talked about many of these things, including, ivermectin. And maybe our video will get flagged right now. I don't know. But apparently ivermectin is like legitimate prophylactic guard against the coronavirus, but you can't talk about these things. Right. And the media, the narrative control that has been exerted on this is really astounding.
Yeah,
and therefore it is a crisis of authority, as you're saying. So please, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, but this, we talk about the media doing this for social issues, like not allowing reports on black crime, for example.
Right.
You notice that in the case of in New Orleans a few weeks back of the shooter at the party, opened fire in a party full of kids. Nobody's talked about the description of the shooters.
Like I literally haven't even heard of the story, which is amazing.
Right. But this is old habit. Now we're talking about science, and not just science, but something that's life and death for hundreds of millions of people around the world. Yeah. And the media collaborated to hush it up. And the thing that a lot of people think, people who haven't been in the media, they think that, the media must know the truth, and they're deciding to not tell us. That's not how it works. Maybe sometimes it works that way.
Explain this, because I might be confused on this one as well.
No, but as somebody who's been on the inside at newspapers, I got to tell you, the bubble think in the media is overwhelming. You only end up talking to people who already think like you in most cases. And now it's always been a problem, but now with the wokeness having invaded newsrooms, when it can be dangerous to your career to dissent, it has become even more dangerous to question your priors.
Right. The prior questioning is such a huge thing because, because it leads you down to scary things like, well, I can't think X, not because of whether or not X is compelling or not, but because in this case, Trump thinks X, or the bad guys think X. Therefore, X is literally off the table.
Yeah, it might help the bad guys. And, I got to tell you, Kale, that risk of beating a dead horse, I learned how this worked, first of all, when I was writing about the Catholic abuse scandal. Realizing that people on my side, conservative Catholics, we couldn't talk about the role celibacy might or might not have played in this. It was off the table because it would give the liberals aid and comfort. I talked to a few years ago, I talked to a man who was involved in a traditionalist Catholic community in which there had been very serious allegations of molestation and cover-up. And this man, who had been a victim of all this, told me that when he was talking to the police investigators about it, one of the police investigators, not a Catholic, just shook his head and said, "Man, these people would sacrifice their own children for the sake of keeping the Latin Mass." Now on the other side, and that's true. And on the other side, of course, the liberals had their sacred cows. You couldn't talk about the role of homosexuality and homosexual networks, and all that. The point simply is, this is not just how the Catholic Church works. This is how institutions built around, our creedal institutions work. That we cannot allow ourselves to consider evidence that could violate or could violate the things that we base our sense of normality and reality on. It's a very human thing. But if this is the case, then you're going to get yourself into very serious trouble, as we found out in Iraq, or you're going to fail to be able to deal with the thing that's right in front of you.
What's so compelling to me about this science narrative story, like the institutional organs of knowledge production vis-a-vis science and research, and this is why I find Bret and Heather so compelling, is that they, look, I've been thinking and complaining and framing the problems about postmodernity in the humanities since 1995, when I was in graduate school, and everything was captured by the Derridians and the Foucauldians and all of those postmodernists, and how they were essentially parasitizing an entire discipline. But you always sort of felt like, well, at least science is going to science, right? At least there has to be some sort of iterability, some sort of repeatability, that if there are findings, that you can sort of test the research and look at the data, and that there's going to be some true thing that emerges. There's that doesn't depend upon my intellectual priors. It doesn't depend upon my emotional priors. It doesn't depend upon these things that I sort of, my political opinions or my my tastes or anything, like, right, that quote unquote science is science. What is so disturbing to me to listen to Bret and Heather, and these two are two evolutionary biologists. They know how to read these scientific papers. They know what's going on, and they're just asking questions. And you start to realize, wait, it's not just the crazy English department. It's not just the crazy philosophy department or the political science department or the psychology department. It's the biology department. It's like applied medicine. I mean, and that's why I think I get so disturbed by this. And then not only that, is that they are actively suppressing things that it's not like you've got a bunch of people who are making it impossible for us to read Shakespeare. I mean, obviously that offends me deeply.
Sure.
But
it's not life or death.
Shakespeare will survive because of crazy people like me. But we're talking about vaccines. We're talking about pandemics. We're talking about viruses. I mean, this is huge stuff. And I can't get out of my head, what are the incentives for them to do this? Why are they playing this game, Rod?
Yeah, that's the thing that really puzzles me. And I think we'll find out. I suspect it has to do, this is the obvious answer, with China's power, China's money, China's research, that China is going to have so much of the future. It's the reason that John Cena, that actor, had to apologize.
Yes. Tell the audience about this. I don't know if our audience.
Yeah, he's just actor in Fast and Furious. He mentioned in an interview, he referred to Taiwan as a country, which it is.
It is.
But he immediately had to abase himself. He did it in Mandarin, apologizing to the Red Chinese for this horrible mistake of calling Taiwan a country. And that's like, I saw a quip on Twitter. Somebody said, and now we know which people control Hollywood. Making a remark about it's not the Jews, it's the Chinese.
Absolutely.
But anyway, I think that people are just terrified of China. And there's so much research money that comes from China and it's tied up with it. And I think that that's got to have something to do with it. But I'm not satisfied with that as the whole.
It needs more. It needs more. It doesn't have. It doesn't fill in all the explanatory power in my opinion.
There's something sacred going on here. Paul Kingsnorth had on his fantastic Substack this week. He's talking about the myth of the machine, about the ideology that governs the modern world, left, right, whatever, it governs the modern world. And he talked about the sort of things that we are asked to accept as for being part of modernity. It's more than just material gain. There has to be something sacred involved here. There's some sacred values, and he's trying to put his finger on.
Yeah. Now, Rod. So you're using that's a religious word, right? This idea of the sacred. I get the sense that Kingsnorth is not talking about it in strictly limited, like sort of religious terms.
No.
What do you think he means by this framing of it as a sacred thing.
Ultimate values. There's something ultimate, an ultimate nature of reality that's in question here. And I think that when
so hold on. But so if I'm like, if I'm a nun, right, NONE, and I don't go to church. I spend Sunday mornings reading the New York Times or whatever. What do you mean? I don't give a rat's behind about the sacred. What are you
everybody's got sacred values. You may not care about God or any of that, but you do. One of your sacred values might be what is called anti-racism, and I think that's probably what's at play here in the resisting the lab leak thing, because a lot of the people who run our media institutions and leading institutions, and universities, labs, and et cetera, we're so caught up in the, oh my God, we can't offend China. We can't talk about the lab leak because that's going to give aid and comfort to people who hate Chinese people. And therefore, it's off the table. I saw this work when I was at the Dallas Morning News well over a decade ago, where I finally realized that for a lot of people in our newsroom, they didn't want to look at actual evidence, concrete evidence that I was able to dig up about really hardcore radical Islamism in our city, because it would give aid and comfort to rednecks who hate Muslims. And I was asked just today by an interviewer for a Spanish newspaper, because I'm about to go to Spain to promote Live Not by Lies. And he asked me, same question I got in France, how is it that LGBT activists over here make common cause with radical Islamists? Don't they realize that if some of these LGBT folks went to Gaza, Hamas would cut their heads off? The answer is no. They push that out of their consciousness, because their sacred value is that whoever's considered an outsider in Western society is therefore good and their ally. This is what the doctrine of intersectionality teaches them. And the radical Islamists are smart about this. They realize that they need allies wherever they can get, and they're happy to play along with these useful idiots for as much as it will get.
I was just going to use that phrase. I mean, Stalin had a great word for it, useful idiots. It's the instrumentalizing of anything that you can use to throw against your enemy, which is sort of like, it's the Pajot has a lot of just really interesting things to say about this in terms of parasitizing storytelling and the margins when they crowd out the mainstream or they crowd out the middle. And maybe we can go back to that. I think it's probably will be helpful with you and your work about narratives and enchantment later on. But anyway, I wanted to bring up maybe an example. Maybe going on a decade ago, the NFL was going through a series of really bad public relations problems with the behavior of their athletes, especially in the off seasons. And it was sort of like clockwork. As soon as the Super Bowl had been decided in early February, you go into the proverbial off seasons, and that's when all bedlam would break out, right? And we'd have drunk driving incidents and domestic battery incidents, and it was really quite the thing. And so the person put in charge of dealing with this was Roger Goodell, the commissioner. And Roger Goodell pulls in close to sort of $30 million a year, something crazy like this.
Almost your salary.
Yeah, almost, not quite. Not quite. But anyway, his mantra was protect the shield. And if you've ever seen an NFL game, it's literally a shield that says NFL on, and it looks like a United States of America type thing. But anyway, his whole MO was protect the shield, to do anything to protect the shield. So of course, the first casualty when you're protecting the brand is truth, right? Because you have to obscure the truth, you have to cover up the truth, you have to run interference for the truth, because your owners are telling you, bad PR, take care of the problem. And so you do all kinds of displays of concern and outrage, and we know the whole public relations game, but everybody basically holds Roger Goodell in extreme contempt, but he's been very successful at protecting the shield. And I always think of him when you start talking about these institutional problems in the, the Catholic Church, the institutional problems in academia, the institutional problems in all of our organs and in the media, is that basically they are being charged with protecting the shield at all costs. And invariably it seems that the way that you protect the shield is by destroying people's lives who are convenient to destroy.
Sure, and it ultimately doesn't end up protecting the shield, because the truth ultimately comes out, especially in the era of the internet. I was reading this really interesting interview with Mark Andreessen, the big Silicon Valley big, and somebody was asking him, "Do you think you're responsible for the internet to a large extent because of your inventions and all that?"
Yeah.
Said, "Do you feel like you need to apologize to the world?" It was kind of a cheeky interview.
Yeah.
And he answered. He had a clever answer. One of the things he said was, people tend to think that back in the pre-internet era, it was a time of relative social harmony. And he goes, actually, that wasn't true. He said that to the extent that we did have social harmony, it was in part because we didn't have enough information. That because the different sources of information, there were so few of them, and there were so many gatekeepers, or you didn't need that many people to be gatekeepers.
Yeah.
The commonly understood narrative was accepted, even if it was a lie. And Mark Andreessen says that it's better to have more versions of the truth because we have a better chance of getting at the truth. And I really think he's onto something, even though it's super anxious because we don't know who the authorities are.
Yeah.
At least I think it's better to know who we can't trust.
Well, like use an example, right? Within this past year, Rush Limbaugh passed away, and Rush Limbaugh almost single-handedly, independent of what you think of him ideologically or even stylistically, Rush Limbaugh almost single-handedly, through the power of AM radio, upended the central narrative. All of a sudden, it gave close to 40% of the population an alternative narrative to what was being spun by CBS, ABC, and NBC. Really a kind of a remarkable thing. And my contention has always been that independent of the particulars, right, of what he was able to do, I think has been a net good because it opened us up. It really, in a way, held the mainstream media a little bit more accountable for the suppression of the narrative.
Yeah,
and again, look, I know, a lot of people, will have their quibbles with Rush, but I always appreciated his opening it up to, hey, maybe there's a different way to frame this. There's a different way to look at this. And I think almost, all of conservative media owes him, I really do believe owes him a bit of a debt to saying, hey, like, let's poke around on these narratives a little bit more.
No, you're right about that. One thing, though, that concerns me about where we are today, and this goes back to something I learned from reading Hannah Arendt.
Yeah.
She said that in a pre-totalitarian society, people quit seeking for the truth, and then they instead look for something that confirms what they already believe. Well,
right.
It's not just in the newsrooms and in the labs and in the classrooms. This is in us too. And
but this is why telling the truth in the first place, as difficult as that is, and as and it's hard to do, and I'm not trying to pass it off as some sort of easy thing. You have to tell the truth. This is the whole live not by lies thing, right? That if you allow untruths, if you allow lies to sort of go through you, you are contributing to the fog. And so a lot of the breakdown of central narratives that we're living through right now, I think is in part due to the lockdown on the narrative that was in place for so long. And so I don't, so for instance, in the church, okay, to sort of take it into a realm that I'm a little bit more familiar with, the narrative of the church, let's say in the United States of America, was controlled by the bishops' conference. It was controlled by the various Catholic media companies, which were in fact in charge, controlled by the bishops, and then all of those cozy relationships that they had with the big newspapers in the big cities, right? And I mean, you were dealing with this all the time, right? So they made a decision. Those people who controlled the narrative made a decision to protect the shield rather than protect children and
as
families.
did the Boston Globe, the New York Times, and
right,
many
right.
media people.
Right, right, and we
back in the
forget
day.
right. We forget that part of the narrative suppression. It's very easy to get mad at a bunch of men walking around in dresses and funny hats, right? But the New York Times and the Boston Globe and the Chicago, they all played that game. They protected each other. They scratched each other's backs, and instead of deciding, hey, like, we need to tell the truth, we need to live not by lies, they decided that the church needed their lies. And so it's hard for me to get mad at all of these various Catholic commentariats that have now emerged on Twitter and YouTube and Instagram, even though I have deep reservations about some of the things that they're spinning. I don't get mad at them. They have an audience because the people who were in authority abused that authority.
Oh, you're exactly right. And Mark Andreessen in that interview is with a guy named Niccolo Soldo, Soldo, if people want to look it up. He talked about why Substack, he's an investor in Substack, why Substack is succeeding, because he said, theoretically, we have so many different mainstream media outlets. People ought to be able to find a variety of opinions and takes on things.
That's right.
In fact, they don't anymore. It has become, this is the left's idea of diversity. A bunch of people who look differently, all saying the same thing. So this is where Substack has arisen to meet that need for something interesting, not even necessarily something ideologically challenging, though that's part of it. It's something interesting. I mean, look, I subscribe to the New York Times for my sins. I've canceled it twice, and my wife has made me restart it because she reads like the food section and things like that. But to be honest, I need to read. I got to have some newspaper, and I might as well get that one. But this is America's Pravda. The op-ed page is so bad. I mean, I look and see. I read what Douthit has written, David Brooks sometimes, Bret Stephens, but mostly these people command the most important piece of real estate, journalistic real estate in the world, and yet it is so bland and monochromatically, almost monochromatically left wing. And
almost. I mean,
Lord, cast Douthit out, and
you got a speck of dust and a speck of dirt here and there with Douthit or whatever, but the whole thing is just
But I mean, but this is what is something so interesting about the times we live in. And somebody, I remember reading some time ago that they were talking about the dilemma of places like the New York Times. Their readers don't actually want diversity.
Right.
That it's not that they're trying to shove this down the throats of their readers, although that must be part of it. But the readers demand that. If the readers get something published in the Times that they don't like, they raise hell.
Right. So, look. The operative. I think the way to think about this is it's fan servicing. In the anime world, fan servicing is taking some of your favorite characters and making them do things that all those sort of the pervy little boys like for them to do, right? Because it services the fans. If you sort of get the metaphor. Well, look, that's what the New York Times is now, right? I mean, it's fan servicing. They're very woke. Very, very motivated fans, right? And that's how they get their money. They need, because the ads have died, right?
Yeah, but did you see that MSNBC's audience is off 75% since Trump went away? The whole network was fan servicing.
75%? Holy smokes! How do you survive that?
I don't know. But I mean, it's awful. But
so I wanted to get back just real quick, something that Bret Weinstein and Heather Heying were talking about in their latest podcast, and it applies here in terms of the lab leak hypothesis and the suppression of it as something that a non-Nazi was allowed to hold, right? And Bret has this very useful thing. He calls it an anamorphic argument. an anamorphic painting is when, if you've seen these paintings or these sort of wall drawings or these things on sidewalks where from a very specific point of view, it looks like there's a hole in the earth, or from a very specific view, it looks like something is happening. But if you move, a tick to the right or a tick to the left, all of a sudden you can kind of see the trick, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And what's happening with the arguments about the coronavirus and the lab leak and all of these things is that from a very specific point of view, it makes sense. But if you take this little thing out and you move this thing a little around, those things that we would ordinarily use to properly orient our perspectives in order to see, it's an illusion, or they're playing tricks with my perceptions, those things get taken out. And so now you're left with wait, am I the crazy one? And I think that the crisis of authority, the crisis of narrative authority is like that. You're watching something, you sort of scratch your head a little bit like, God, that doesn't really seem odd. Like, is it really racist to say that the virus may have leapt from a lab? Why isn't it racist to say that it naturally occurred in a wet market? Like, what's the difference between those two things? And you sort of left scratching your head, but then you look around, you're like, well, all the pretty and all the smart people are saying that that's a completely ridiculous opinion. So I'm just going to go, I have to sort of, throw my hands up and says, well, I guess it just happened naturally. And you're right, mate. It probably is racist to call it, to say that it happened in a lab. I guess that's correct. And you can sort of see how that has a power to sort of shape and warp one's perspective.
Right. I think it was Michael Crichton, the late Michael Crichton, who said that everybody is conservative about the things they know about.
That's right. That's really great.
So, I mean, I tend to be really conservative to the point of cynicism about the media. Mm-hmm. But, I turn around to science, which I don't know anything about, and I tend to be pretty gullible. When I was in Poland at this conference over the weekend, I was talking to, I think it was an American who was living also in this part of the world. And we were comparing notes about how radically different our experience of life actually on the ground here in Poland and Hungary, Central Europe is versus what we know about from the media. Mm-hmm. And this guy said to me, he goes, it makes me wonder about the reporting from every country. Yeah. If the reporting is so ideologically spun and cooked when they write about what's happening in Hungary or Poland, countries that we know something about because we live here, can we trust what it says about France or Afghanistan or Russia or China? I mean, it's
think about this, Rod. I went, I went from Louisiana. I went to New Hampshire for college in the fall of 1992. Okay, so this is pre-internet, and so I go up to this small, tiny liberal arts college in New Hampshire, and I tell people I'm from Louisiana, and I remember this guy from New Jersey, and he kind of looked at me and he's like, kind of a little surprised, and I started talking with him a little bit. And he was a good guy. I mean, this is he's not being a jerk, but he couldn't conceive of a Louisiana that didn't involve a swamp and a Piro and living, like this strange sort of hyper specific vision that he must have seen in a movie about what life in Louisiana was like. And I remember saying like, well, like we've got a Walmart down the block and there's a mall there, and we have McDonald's and all the normal things that you have in New Jersey. And it was such a sort of impoverishment, but he had basically sort of believed what he saw in the movies about a bunch of, knuckle dragging rednecks who live in Louisiana. And again, he wasn't being a jerk about it. He was being kind of honest with, and it was at that point that I realized like, man, people, but similarly, I remember before I had gone up to New England, I sort of had this vision of New England as sort of everybody walks around with Argyle sweaters and tweed blazers on, and they, listen to classical music and all of that. And well, that is not the case.
They go get their bread at Pepperidge Farm.
Yes, right. Right now, look, the internet has gone a long way toward obliterating a lot of those sort of sillier versions of false narratives. But at the same time, it seems to have exploded those more subtle and more pernicious ones where you can kind of get away with it. And this is, I think, part of the bubbles that we live in, that is really hard, I think, for people to break out of. And you really see it on Twitter, obviously. And I have always held, I don't spare, our fellow conservatives. I don't give them the benefit of the doubt necessarily. And look, when there's fouls there, we gotta call those fouls and call balls and strikes and all that kind of stuff. But I think that conservatives in general, and I'm really kind of talking here more social conservatives in general, I think have a better ability to sniff out inconsistencies and problems with the narratives, because we're already having to sort of filter, when you're a conservative, you're already just sort of doing this filter game where you're like, well, can I really believe that? Can I really trust that?
Yeah. But this is the advantage of being an outsider.
Right.
I remember,
right.
I've been an outsider when I was in professional newsrooms as a conservative and as a religious conservative.
Yeah.
I was an outsider, and I don't say that like poor pitiful me. Just a fact, And in the same way, a liberal might have been an outsider in bond traders' room at one point. Yeah. But it does make you do appreciate what being an outsider, what it allows you to see about how a system works or a society works, even a small society. And so I think that people who talk about diversity making for a better operating system, better small society. It could be the case in certain places because you want people who can spot the errors and work to correct it. If you're looking for real diversity.
Yeah, I totally agree. I remember my brother back in the day when I was, it was like 20 years ago. He used to work in Capitol Hill, and he was very invested in all of the legislation and all the politics stuff, right? And that was never really my thing, but I sort of kept my eyes on that. I read the newspapers, et cetera. And I remember he would call me from time to time. This is when I was living in Baton Rouge, and then while I was living in Los Angeles, and he would just sort of say, "Hey, Kale, like what are people like really talking about like out there? Like I'm in the Beltway, I'm in this bubble." And I always, that it's always been great. And I said, well, look, this is sort of what people are talking about. He's like, okay, I kind of thought that might be the case here. Everybody's talking about this, but I think that they're just sort of, in this teapot, and they're getting all, and so I've always taken that as a way of ensuring that I'm not falling down various rabbit hole bubbles. I don't know if I'm mixing my metaphor there.
Rabbit bubbles, Kale.
Rabbit bubbles, obviously. But I noticed this too, like with my very online Catholic friends, they all they know are other Catholics, and it has a way of sort of warping your sense of things. And I would say the same thing happens especially on Twitter. And all the various, there's weird Catholic Twitter, and there's political Twitter, and there's biology Twitter, and there's all the various things that I try to sort of spread myself around in. But this occurred to me one day. I was in a faculty meeting, and the whole racism thing was coming up, and one of my colleagues was talking about the 1619 Project as if it were this person had read the 1619 Project as if it was sort of impeccable and perfectly true and every way. And I sort of did a double take, and I'm like, oh, that's right. I'm a weirdo who like actually reads around these things and reads through these things and checks sources. And like, I'm sitting here laughing like the 1619 Project is the biggest joke on the planet, but I forgot, hey, guess what? It won the Pulitzer Prize. So my colleagues who are perfectly fine with those sort of narratives take it as gospel truth. 1619 Project, gospel truth.
Yeah, and we have the same thing on our side too. I speaking of outrages, I know we're getting to the end of our time here, and also I don't know if you've been able to notice this, but I've been sitting outside in this sort of shaft, and everything's getting grayer and grayer. We've had the coldest, grayest spring here. People are freaking out. It will not get warm, and it will not get sunny. So, and I feel like I think it's going to be raining shortly. So
we'll wrap this up. But
let me say this though, that I was absolutely shocked to see at this QAnon conference in Dallas that General Michael Flynn call for a military coup in this country and be cheered by it. Now, Michael Flynn's a nut, I've said publicly he's a nut since he went to the Jericho March thing. But I mean, my God, we're at a place now where a room full of conservatives, not I'm talking about mainstream conservatives, go to a conference hall in Dallas and cheer for the idea of a military coup in this country.
Just amazing. I mean, that's just, this is the power of the bubbles, right?
Yep.
And this is the power. This is the power of celebrity within bubbles, and I think that's even more disturbing.
Well, and you know what? Similarly, we've had, I think maybe since you and I talked, I was reading about how it really does seem like the U.S. military is now pushing to declare everybody who supports Trump is a potential extremist, and that's scary too. It makes you wonder what's happened to this country. I'll be going to Spain in a couple of weeks for the Live Not by Lies tour over there. And I remember when I was there 2 years ago for the Benedict option, talking to some people about Spaniards about how, it's kind of starting to feel Spanish Civil War like in America. Well, now that's on steroids. And
I do think it's the thing that nobody in America really knows that much about. And I think I'm talking about the Spanish Civil War. We have very sort of curated views of that vis-a-vis Hemingway and other people, but it's do a deep dive into the history of the Spanish Civil War, and you can see we are in that lane right now, people. We are in that lane. And it was a brutal reality. I mean, a bloody, brutal family against family, person against person reality.
And you couldn't be neutral there. I mean, and this is the scary thing about it. I've said on my blog many times, and maybe we can put it here in the show notes for our podcast. The 6-part series Granada Television did in the 1980s, British TV producers, on the Spanish Civil War. And you can see it on YouTube. I would advise watching the first episode. I thought because it's British TV, it would be biased to the left. In fact, they're doing a pretty even-handed job there. They were able to interview, because this was the 80s, they were able to interview a lot of people who had been involved in the Spanish Civil War on both sides. But if you only watch the first episode, it's worthwhile, because it's about the lead up to the Civil War, the 5 years before the shooting started.
Right.
And it's so eerily familiar. Turns out the Republic was declared, the king abdicated, some of the left's extremists started doing like Antifa and others, burning down convents, attacking churches. The right came back to power 2 years later. The pendulum kept swinging more and more. And finally, there's this one guy, an old right-winger, who says, by 1935, whenever we saw a socialist or a communist walking down the street, we saw the devil. And they felt the same way about us.
Wow.
And
here we are. So
Spain is still not. Spain has still not healed from this.
No, because the pendulum swings in the aftermath too. Once Franco passes away, they're still dealing with the aftermath of this. A friend of mine today, and a guy from Baton Rouge who lives in Spain, was telling me, he sent me a link from a story, the new socialist communist government. I'm sorry, it's not a new government, the sitting government. There has now a law that would mandate prison time for anyone standing near an abortion clinic handing out pro-life material. And he said that people are getting really fed up with this. I hope so. I'm going to find out for myself and report back. I'm looking forward to that. That sounds good. All right. Well, look, Rod, this is great. Thank you we held up. We were worried about our internet signal there, but look, and the rain has held up as well. So anyway, why don't you send us off here, man?
Okay. Don't get nothing on you.
All right. Bye-bye.